I want to welcome our next speaker, Alessandro Blasimme, joining us from ETH Zurich. Alessandro, do you want to share your screen with us?
I will. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Marina, for giving me the virtual floor. Let me see if I manage to do that. Okay, you should see my screen, do you? Okay, cool. So yes, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad I am continuing with the Italian afternoon session. I'm Italian by origin, although I work and live in Switzerland. So the topic of my talk is explainability of medical AI. So there is a big discussion, even in popular media, about the explainability of artificial intelligence. And by the way, also this discussion has deep regulatory implications, like Barbara's work. And I'm in touch as well with Swiss regulators in the context of a National Science Foundation grant, but I won't go into these regulatory aspects. I'm happy to answer questions about that. My talk will mainly revolve around epistemological and, let's say, philosophy of medicine kind of issues. Of course, this debate is also prominent in scholarly circles, and many people argue that artificial intelligence algorithms should be explainable, and I'm gonna go into what that means later. And this, of course, applies also to the medical use of so-called black box algorithms. In a nutshell, a black box algorithm is a system that sees data and gives me an output in terms of a prediction or a decision or a classification output. But it does not allow me to see its internal operations. So it's not possible for me to access the rules that the algorithm is using to make inferences, because those rules are not programmed by the developer. They are learned by the algorithm on its own. So many people argue that these kind of algorithms warrant clinical use only if they can be made explainable, and others maintain that accuracy is a sufficient justification for their use despite their being opaque. Now, I would like to say that my position sort of rejects both and proposes something in between, as I will say in a moment. But let me give a very quick, brief, and simple overview of what black box algorithms are. First of all, there are at least two types of artificial intelligence under the heading of machine learning that count as black box artificial intelligence. One is supervised and the other is unsupervised machine learning. So very simply, supervised machine learning is fed with training data that are labeled. They are ground truth annotated. So basically, we give the computer examples of what is Tom and what is Jerry. And basically, the algorithm learns how to distinguish these two classes and makes normally very accurate classifications with new data. So this is the training data set, and this is the result with actual data. In the unsupervised version, the input is constituted by raw data, so they're not labeled for ground truth, and the algorithm autonomously finds patterns in the data that allows it to basically come to clustering different types of input data. So this is in a nutshell how it works. It's actually not very much more complicated than that. Of course, the learning happens through iterative application of statistical inference by the computer. And the other thing that needs to be mentioned is that the input data can be of various sorts. In medicine, it can be electronic health records or diagnostic images, for example. So in the domain of medicine, machine learning in both versions is used for classification purposes. It's used to segment patient populations. It's used for prognostic reasons and for diagnostic reasons. And I'm going to give you a very rapid overview of some examples, just so that those who are not familiar with these models can have an idea of what they do in a clinical setting. So this is an algorithm that basically infers, makes a diagnosis of diabetic retinopathy in retinal fundus photographs, so images of the patient's eye. Interestingly enough, the same kind of input data, so retinal fundus photographs, can be used also to predict cardiovascular risk, which was not expected. So we were not expecting that this kind of input data would contain information about cardiovascular risk, which is what surprised the researchers themselves. Other diagnostic tasks that these systems can perform is classification of risk of skin cancer. So they can cluster skin lesions according to their clinical significance. Or they can be used also for prognostic reasons. For example, here, this study created a machine learning algorithm to assess short-term mortality in cancer patients. This is, as you can understand, very important, because if a patient ranks high on the risk of short-term mortality, for example, decisions about initiating another round of chemotherapy might be affected by this kind of knowledge. Same here, in the case of COVID-19, this paper tries to predict mortality based on a number of features. And by the way, age, of course, as we know, is a major predictor of mortality for COVID-19. And you can understand that these systems can be used, for example, in triage or allocation of intensive care beds. I will leave the ethical issues aside here, of course. Also interesting, my last example is the convergence of AI and mobile technologies in the development of so-called digital biomarkers of cognition or prediction of Alzheimer's disease. Now, having said these very general introductory things, here is my plan. So what I would like to do is to try to clarify what a black box algorithm means from an epistemological point of view, and discuss whether the fact that these systems are agnostic with respect to the causal structure of the phenomenon that they observe is compatible with justified medical acts. And my overall position is that AI, black box AI per se, does not undermine justification, provided that some conditions apply. And the application of such conditions, I would say, requires knowledge of the causal structure of the, for example, pathogenicity of the phenomenon that we are observing. So what I'm going to do is to give a conceptual analysis first, and then discuss how interpretable AI can support justification of medical acts. So my question here is very simple, and it's the following. Can a clinician have reasons, sufficient reasons to act according to the advice of a black box? And this question is different from asking whether a physician would be required to follow the advice of a black box. And it's also different from a question as to whether she would have reasons to believe what the black box says. But actually, this last question and the one that is on the screen right now are deeply connected. And what I would like to show is that a doctor does not have justified reasons to act according to a black box, unless she also has justified reasons to believe that what the black box says is correct. So there is a dependency between theoretical and practical reasons here. In common parlance, we say that a doctor should know what she's doing. And this means that what the doctor is doing is based on a justified belief that the act will yield the intended outcome. Now, a clinical or medical act, it's the same, is justified when a physician has reasons to act in that way. And these reasons, as I just said, are both theoretical and practical. The theoretical reasons relate to the availability of a valid causal explanation for the belief that sustained the act, the medical act. And the practical reasons instead are reasons about the appropriateness of the act given the particular circumstances in which the act happens. For example, taking a risky surgery on a terminally ill patient may be justified theoretically, but for practical reasons, it might not be justified to do it. Or even cost-related reasoning might enter into the practical area of this simple model. Now, I need to stress here again that the way I think reasons to believe and reasons to act stand in relation to one another in the case of medical act is that theoretical reasons are a necessary but not a sufficient condition for a medical act to be justified. So what I'm saying is that knowing the reason behind, for example, the why of a diagnosis, means knowing how the decision relates to the causal structure of the phenomenon. And this is necessary, but not sufficient for a medical act to be justified. That is, to support action. So reasons to believe, however, cannot always be causal or mechanistic explanations in the presence of opacity. And I will now show what I think opacity means. So, opacity means, in my view, two things. So when we talk about black box AI, actually we should be careful and try to clarify. So on the one hand, we can talk of algorithmic opacity, naming the idea that it is impossible to have access to the rules, to read the rules that the algorithm has learned. As I said, these rules are not programmed, so they're not known to the developers. But there is another sense that is captured by the expression opacity in the debate about explainability, and this is what I call epistemic opacity. This means that it is impossible to understand why input and output are associated, because basically the algorithm doesn't give us an explanatory mechanism about these associations. Some people think that this has to do with the high level of complexity of the statistical associations that the algorithm learns. But the bottom line here is that the variables that the AI looks at and the prediction that it makes are not connected through an explanatory mechanism. So in a nutshell, this means that algorithmic opacity is the same thing as lack of transparency. So I cannot have access to this layer here because this is an hidden layer. Epistemic opacity refers to the fact instead that even if I had access to the layers, I wouldn't have an explanation. I wouldn't be able to see these dots as components of a causal structure. So let me go to the second part of this argument. So my argument is against characterizing black box as being entirely atheoretical, so entirely extraneous to causal reasoning. On the one hand, I will show that one can dispel some of the opacity of algorithms retrospectively. And on the other hand, I'm going to show that causal and mechanistic knowledge is indeed needed to develop good AI, including good black box AI. Now, the first thing here to show is that there are ways to understand at least what kind of features the algorithm, the black box, is looking at to make its predictions. So here you see a heat map that is basically highlighting the pixels in this image that allow this particular algorithm to say that this animal here is a cat. If it is a cat, I mean, it looks like a wild cat or something like that. Now, heat maps actually indicates the components of a causal structure, although they don't say anything about how those parts are connected. There is no explanatory mechanisms. But heat maps can either hint to causal hypotheses that can be probed experimentally, or they can be made to fit mechanistic explanations retrospectively. And this is why I speak of retrofitting explanation here. So the heat map should in principle be able to confirm what we already know about the way the components of the causal structure of the phenomenon stand with one another. Here is an example from the medical field. This is the paper I put up before. And so this is an image of an eye fundus. And you see that the greener parts of the image correlate with some features that the algorithm has extracted: age, gender, smoking, for example, body mass. In this case, it remains difficult to say how the greener parts relate to those features, but at least these maps can be interrogated experimentally to find out. So another way of retrofitting explanation is to use proximal annotation. So here, the authors of these interesting papers say what I just said, so that heat maps are useful tools to understand which part of the image guided the deep learning model to its decision. But the heat map does not provide information about the reason behind it, so it's not explanatory. The hypothesis of these researchers from Milan Polytechnic is that when you analyze a real case, a patient case that has no annotation, so you don't know whether the patient has or doesn't have the disease, a surrogate support can be given by similar annotated cases. It works like this, basically. So the red triangle is the prediction of the algorithm, and if you compare the prediction of the algorithm with cases already classified that have similar features to the one that you are analyzing, you can see whether the prediction falls into an area of this space that is populated with similar predictions, or whether instead it falls outside. And in this way, you gain more. The doctor can have more or less confidence in the conclusions, in the predictions of the algorithm. So my conclusion for this part is that the black box can be reconciled with causal mechanistic knowledge retrospectively. And while these algorithms do not become transparent, they become interpretable in light of causal mechanistic knowledge. When we talk about the second type of opacity, so the actual incapacity of algorithms to give us a mechanistic explanation of what they're doing, basically, here, my point is that a doctor has reasons to believe what the black box says if she can be confident that developers have controlled for some common errors like bias and variance in the training data set. So I don't have to explain to you what these features are, especially because they're not unique to black box AI. So both basic research and epidemiology face the risk of bias and variance all the time. So we know what we're talking about. Now, to correct these mistakes, you need causal knowledge of the phenomenon that the algorithm is trying to grasp. So here again, there is a role for causal knowledge in the design of the black box AI. And again, this leads us to say that they are not entirely atheoretical or causally agnostic, as many people instead seem to assume. Controlling for confounders is also another way to increase trust, clinical trust in these systems. Of course, a black box can find spurious correlation because it cannot distinguish confounders. But you can clean the training data set of confounders, and to do that, you need, again, to know the causal structure of the phenomenon that you are observing. Now, curated data increase the likelihood that what the AI is seeing is not spurious. And people, however, generally assume that ITs do not pay a lot of attention to data curation, as if they let the AI explore an indefinitely large parametric space to gain more information. Actually, if you restrict the parametric space, if you restrict the number of variables to those that are likely to have a causal role, you increase the informational content of a database. So my conclusion for this part is that one, you need causal knowledge to build robust AI. So an AI that warrants justified belief. And that robust AI is interpretable in light of the causal knowledge you have used to correct for bias, variance, and confounders. So if we try to answer my initial question, can clinicians have reasons, good reasons, to act according to the advice of a black box? I would say that controlling for bias, variance, and confounders, as well as retrofitting output to the causal structure of the phenomenon, can actually increase justification of a medical act based on a black box, because you have controlled for known sources of errors. At this point, one has a theoretical basis to justify action. However, a medical act has to take other variables into account, the practical ones. And here, I'm just putting this up for illustrative purposes. Even in the paradigm of evidence-based medicine, it's apparent that there are, other than the best available clinical evidence, there are other factors that justify a medical act. So basically, what I said tries to complicate a little bit the simplistic scheme underlying the thinking about AI of those who pit accuracy and explainability one against the other, for example, like this paper does. In this particular paper, the author says that basically, if you have a reason to believe what the AI says is true, then ipso facto you have a reason to act by the advice of a black box AI. But I think that this actually is not a correct way to depict the relationship between justificatory reasons for medical acts. So general conclusions, my last slide. I would say that it is not correct to say that AI entails the replacement or even the dismissal of human expertise, because even black box AI is, to some extent at least, interpretable. And while black box AI cannot become neither transparent nor explanatory, it is still interpretable in light of causal mechanistic knowledge. Therefore, it is impossible to, it is not impossible to reconcile black box AI with the mechanicistic epistemology and of medicine and the causal structure of the work. In a nutshell, black box is not a leap out of the chartered territory of medical epistemology. So my thesis is, in simple terms, can be summarized as follows. We should not fear opacity for being irreconcilable with the epistemology of medicine, but we should neither take AI accuracy as a sufficient justification for a medical act. So I'm 2 minutes over time, sorry about that, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much for that interesting talk. And once again, if people have questions, please raise your hand in the participants bar. And I'll say we did get started a little bit late, so you're definitely not off the hook for some questions here. Barbara, would you like to go first? Barbara, can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Thank you. Just a clarificatory question. Can you go back to the slide where you have this not representable, not generalizable? I mean, you have this, you have this three diagrams where it's at the beginning. I couldn't check the number.
Let me do this.
No, it's just for clarificatory purposes. I mean,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
one,
yeah.
this one. This one.
This one?
Yes, but we cannot see. No. Later on, sorry. I can see only a part of the slide. I don't know about the others.
Wait a second.
Yeah. I mean, there's no hurry.
Solve it, so. Okay, do you see it now?
A little bit above. I mean, one of the first one, a little bit below. I mean, maybe the next one. No. I mean, where you have representability and generalizability, and they are opposed to each other.
Yes.
Because generally they are the same. That's why I'm asking you. I mean, the more you're in standard statistics, yeah, that's one.
Yeah.
Can you say more about this? Because then you had the fact that you had, yes, not representative and not generalizable.
Yeah, so this is, of course, this kind of treatment of the topic is internal to medicine. So when in the debates about machine learning and AI in medicine, a biased algorithm is one that is trained on data that are not representative or not sufficiently representative of the target population. So to give you a concrete example, if you train an algorithm on genetic data, using existing, for example, the data sets that are used for genome-wide association studies. These data sets are known to be overly populated by genetic data of adult white men. And the reasoning here is that this kind of data would not, this kind of algorithms would not work equally as well with people of different sex or different gender or different ethnic background. Of course, I mean, the community is aware of this problem, and the problem can be solved even by sampling, again, sampling on purpose for the kind of task that you want the algorithm to learn. On the other end, the issue of high variance is very common to epidemiology as well. Now, with large population cohorts that have a lot of variables and that are very rich in clinical and phenotypic data. Of course, the risk is that you can, it's data dredging, basically. You can find spurious correlations, and even, I mean, to some extent, increasing the threshold for statistical significance might help you, but the statistical significance that you need for publishing is not such a bulletproof threshold for against data dredging. So here again, I don't know if this answers your question.
Yeah, it's a two opposite ways of being ad hoc. In the former ways, in the high bias, you have such a pure sample that can, the algorithm is very simple, but then it doesn't apply to other samples. And here you have a very mixed, I mean, the overfitting have a very mixed sample, but then you you overfit it, so you get it right for that sample, but not for other. So it's two different ways of being ad hoc in some sense.
Yeah, and actually, for example, I mean, one of the features that is more discussed about AI is the capacity of algorithms to find previously unknown patterns in the data. But of course, a machine can be a very powerful way to automate the search for new patterns, but you have to check that those patterns are not spurious. So in one of the examples that I put up, the one in which cardiovascular risk was predicted from images of the retinal fundus, it struck the researchers that this information about cardiovascular risk was even present in that system. Then, of course, one can speculate that it's the vessels in the images that tell you something about cardiovascular risk, and then you sort of reconcile the prediction with the causal structure of the word, so to say. But of course, the risk that the computer finds something that is spuriously associated is very high, and it must be controlled for.
Just a finger on this. So I imagine that the causal knowledge helps in overfitting rather than, so that you reduce the path, the indicators through common causes, or.
Yeah, that's certainly true, but also in bias. For example, if we didn't know, for example, in the case of genetics that I made before, if we didn't know that different human populations have different genetic variants of the same allele, of the same genes, we couldn't actually imagine that ethnicity would be a factor of bias, an element of bias. We can correct for bias because we know how things are out there at the level of the way in which genetic variants are distributed in the human population. So my claim here is just intended to support the idea that these algorithms, although they are novel, or though they are surprising at times, they don't lie entirely outside of hypothetical deductive science, so to say.
Thanks very much. We are over our time, so I want to thank our speaker and celebrate with some virtual clapping, and encourage folks to follow up during the break. Thank you so much, Alessandro.
Thank you.